The wound wasn't that big, just a jagged gash across the side of his thigh, but it bled like it had a personal vendetta against his pants. Thick, red droplets soaked through the fabric until it clung to his skin. Terran Wyatt gritted his teeth, dropped his pack, and sat on the nearest rock slab, breathing hard. "Okay," he muttered, digging into the side pouch of his field kit. "Steri wipe gauze tape, that's all I need. In, clean, out, done." A bulbous green head popped into his peripheral vision. "Are you leaking vital fluids?" Terran glanced up. Yilrex, one of the Thalkeen exchange students, blinked both sets of eyelids and leaned closer, his vertical pupils dilating. "I'm bleeding, yeah," Terran said. "It's not arterial, I'll clean it." Yilrex's gill-like folds quivered. "You must be transported to isolation and put under patho-scan. It could be infected, is it? Necrotizing? It's not infected," Terran said, already tearing open the antiseptic wipe. "I fell on some rocks, it happens." Another Thalkeen, Cern, shuffled over, his gangly limbs twitching. "It has not been sanitized. You're allowing contaminants to fester. That's how the Venari plague started on Gorthula 4. Terran paused mid-swipe. "That was from a mutated fungus in a sewage pipeline, not from a scraped leg." "Still," Cern said, backing up slightly, "I am recording this." "For protocol," Terran sighed. "Fine, record away, just don't touch anything." The antiseptic stung like hell. He hissed through his teeth, wiped the wound thoroughly, and then applied gauze with slow, deliberate pressure. The aliens flinched at every motion like he was about to explode. "You're introducing gauze directly into exposed tissue," Yilrex said, staring in horror. "It's sterile," Terran replied. "This is basic first aid." Yilrex switched to his native language and consulted Cern in hushed clicks and warbles. Terran couldn't make out the words, but he caught the tone, alarm and a heavy dose of alien worry. "I think I need to report this to Instructor Veal," Cern said abruptly and darted off toward the cliffside path that led back to the mobile outpost. Terran groaned. "Of course." He finished taping the gauze in place, flexed his legs slowly, and winced. The muscles were sore and the impact had bruised the surrounding area, but he could walk. Limp, maybe, but walk. Yilrex crouched beside him, still staring. "You do not feel the rot setting in." "There's no rot," Terran said. "It's a cut." "You are very calm for someone with an open wound." Terran looked at him. "You'd be surprised how often humans get hurt. We've got centuries of practice." Yilrex tilted his head. "I have only seen wounds on preserved corpses in xenomedical archives." Terran gave him a sideways glance. "Well, now you've got front-row seats." Yilrex didn't seem amused. He stood up slowly and tapped on his data pad. "I must log the incident. Standard interspecies health monitoring." "It is possible you are contagious," Terran snorted. "Only thing I'm contagious with is frustration." He stood, testing his weight. Pain shot up his thigh, but it wasn't unbearable. He took a few steps and adjusted his stride to accommodate the limp. The outpost was only a kilometer away. Yilrex followed, recording everything like a nervous court stenographer. By the time they reached the outpost, Cern had already stirred up a frenzy. 3 other Thalkeen students were clustered around the front entrance, whispering and glancing nervously at Terran's leg. Instructor Veal, an aging Zarn diplomat who had taken on the thankless job of mentoring multi-species field teams, emerged from the main hatch with a frown on his wrinkled face. "Terran," Veal said, arms crossed. "I was told you are actively deteriorating." "I have a cut," Terran said. "I cleaned it. I'm fine." He refused quarantine, Cern added, antennae twitching. Veal gestured toward the medical bay. "You'll allow me to inspect it." Terran hesitated. "You're not going to stick a needle in me, are you? I'll defer to your species' medical standards," Veal said. "But I must verify that you are not putting the rest of the team at risk." Terran sighed. "Fine." Inside the medbay, Veal scanned the wound with a handheld diagnostic wand. The display lit up with overlapping graphs and chemical readouts. "No signs of infection," Veal said. "Tissue damage is mild to moderate. You cleaned it thoroughly. However, you should rest." "I can rest after we finish the sample survey," Terran said. "We've only got 2 days left in the field." Your enthusiasm is admirable, Veal said, but foolish. Terran raised an eyebrow. Is that how you compliment people? Veal grumbled something in Zarn and handed him a compression brace. Use this to support the muscle. You'll need to keep pressure off it for 48 hours. Terran nodded, slid the brace over his leg and adjusted the straps. It helped. Not enough to sprint, but enough to walk without looking like he'd been shot in the hip. When he emerged from the med bay, the other students stared at him like he'd cheated death. Again. Terran gave them a half-hearted wave and limped toward the supply room. Calorin, the only other human on the expedition, intercepted him halfway. You okay? She asked. Terran shrugged. I've had worse. That's not an answer, Calorin said. You get it cleaned? Yeah, no infection. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. CERN told everyone you had a flesh collapse incident. Terran blinked. Is that what they're calling it? They also think you're going to lose the leg. Terran exhaled slowly. I stubbed my toe last week and Ylrex almost called planetary emergency services. The Thalkeen aren't used to surface injuries, Calorin said. Or pain, or dirt, she grinned. Definitely not dirt. They returned to the habitat's main chamber. The rest of the team continued to eye Terran warily, whispering in languages he couldn't quite translate. He ignored them and limped to his workstation, where mineral samples from the canyon walls were waiting to be labeled. The next morning, Terran rose with a stiff leg and a pounding headache. He checked the wound. No swelling, no redness. The gauze was clean. Still, he swapped it out, applied a new antiseptic layer and rewrapped it before limping to the mess hall. The moment he entered, the room fell silent. Ylrex stood abruptly, holding a plate of steamed algae paste. You are still ambulatory. You wanted me to be bedridden? No, I assumed you would be sedated. Terran sat down slowly. It's healing. Humans heal. CERN stepped closer. We read your species has a high infection rate in open wounds, especially in field environments. We also have immune systems, Terran said, and antiseptics. Ylrex looked unconvinced. You are certain there is no internal decay? Terran set down his fork. Are you planning to dissect me or something? No, Ylrex said too quickly. Terran leaned back, letting the silence stretch. Eventually, Calorin entered, holding a tray and raising an eyebrow. You threatening to dissect him again? Ylrex looked indignant. That was one time. Calorin sat beside Terran. Next time you scare them, at least bleed somewhere dramatic. Like the face, Terran chuckled. No promises, but the incident didn't fade. Over the next 2 days, the Thalkeen grew more obsessed. CERN asked to take photos of the wound's progression. Ylrex attempted to swab the outer gauze for microbial cultures. One night, Terran woke up to find a small biosensor taped to his brace. He peeled it off and held it up the next morning. Whose is this? Ylrex raised a hand hesitantly. I needed a baseline reading on your tissue oxygenation. Terran stared at him. Without asking, I left a note. You wrote it in Thalkeen glyphs. That is my native language, Ylrex replied, as though that explained everything. Veal had to intervene again. He called a group meeting, explained human biology in dry, clinical detail, and reminded the students that Terran was not an experimental subject. Still, the whispers didn't stop, and neither did the questions. Terran returned to the canyon wall 3 days later, carefully lowering himself into the ravine with Calorin's help. His leg was still sore, but functional. The wound had scabbed over and the brace gave him enough support to keep moving. Ylrex watched him climb down and turned to CERN. He is functioning. He is healing, CERN said reluctantly, without injections, without stasis, without shedding necrotic layers. CERN nodded slowly. I believe we need to revise our xenomedical assumptions. Below, Terran knelt by a layer of exposed sediment and scraped a chunk free with his pick. He glanced up toward the ridge. I can hear you, you know, he called. Ylrex flinched. Of course, human auditory range is broader than expected. Terran smiled faintly. So is our capacity to survive. Terran's left leg gave a subtle protest as he stepped down into the mineral basin. the compression brace holding firm but reminding him not to get cocky. The sediment underfoot was slick with fine dust, the kind that clung to boots and made your soles feel like they'd been dipped in butter. Caloran was somewhere above, logging core samples with a drone, but he preferred to work directly with the shelf rock. It didn't talk back. He crouched, eased a chisel under a fractured seam, and tapped gently until it separated cleanly. The exposed strata were rich with embedded flecks, likely iron composites, maybe something rarer. He held up the piece to the light filtering through the upper canopy of the canyon, then slipped it into a specimen pouch. A quiet shuffle behind him made him pause. "I'm not bleeding again," he said without turning. "You can relax." "I am not here to observe your fluids," Ylrek said. He had a small satchel slung across one shoulder and appeared to be holding something wrapped in a heat-shielded cloth. "I brought sustenance." Terran stood carefully. "You brought me lunch. I synthesized a blend of your nutritional requirements based on your species intake logs. It is warm. Supposedly comforting. I'm not emotionally bonded to soup, Ylrex. Still, the act of consuming something warm correlates with increased serotonin in your species. It seemed logical. Terran accepted the bundle, peeled back the covering, and blinked. "Is this mushroom stew?" "It is a reconstructed approximation of one. The protein base is from hydroponic kelp root. The flavor profile was adjusted for human palatability." Terran took a cautious sip. It was surprisingly close to something his grandmother used to make on rainy days, minus the salt. "Not bad. You didn't spit in it, did you?" Ylrex's gills fluttered. "That would be a severe violation of cross-species hygiene protocol. Just checking." He leaned against a weathered boulder and continued sipping, the warmth easing the tightness in his jaw. The canyon was quiet, save for the occasional clatter of pebbles dislodged by wind or small creatures. Ylrex stayed standing, unusually restless for someone who typically moved like a statue on tranquilizers. "You're not just here to feed me soup." "No." Terran raised an eyebrow. "I would like to understand your pain thresholds in more detail," Ylrex said. "Your response to injury deviates significantly from any baseline we have on record." "I didn't scream and ask for morphine. That's not a deviation." "That's just a Tuesday." "You did not even vocalize discomfort during antiseptic application. Based on your dermal receptors, that should have triggered a reactive flinch." I flinched internally. Ylrex didn't laugh, he never did, but his posture relaxed by a few degrees. "May I ask you something more specific?" "Sure, as long as it doesn't involve more poking." "If your limb had become necrotic hypothetically, at what point would you have consented to amputation?" Terran blinked. "That's your follow-up to soup. I require a comprehensive understanding of your threat assessment patterns. I wouldn't let it get to necrosis in the first place. Assume you did." Terran tilted the bowl, finishing the last of it. "If it was dead tissue and there was no way to restore function, I'd let a doc take it. But I'd try everything else first. Hyperbaric oxygen, systemic antibiotics, whatever we had. Humans don't throw in the towel easily." Ylrex nodded slowly. "Even when cellular degradation is irreversible, especially then, we like a good underdog fight. That aligns with data from your conflict histories." Terran handed the empty bowl back. "You read war logs for fun, not for fun, for insight. Your species has an unusual pattern of escalating commitment under adverse conditions. Some call it stubbornness. We do not have a word for that. That surprises no one." Ylrex tucked the bowl into his satchel but didn't leave. He stared at the canyon walls for a long moment, his eyes tracing the mineral lines like they were constellations. "May I ask another question? You're kind of on a roll now. When you fell, and the injury occurred, what was your first thought?" Terran shrugged. "Check the damage. Stop the bleeding, make sure nothing was broken, not fear, no time for fear. That comes after, maybe." Ylrex's pupils narrowed. "Your cognitive priorities are inverted compared to most sapients." "I've heard that before." A soft chime interrupted them, Caloran's drone signaling the end of its scan. Moments later, she rappelled down with easy grace, her boots crunching against loose shale. She glanced at the two of them, then at the empty bowl in Ylrex's bag. "Did you just feed my partner questionable stew in a canyon?" "It was nutritionally aligned," Ylrex said calmly. Terran gave her a look. "Don't worry, it didn't scream or twitch." Calorin set her tablet on a flat rock and began sorting through the collected samples. "You're not turning into a Thalkeen science mascot, are you? Only on alternate Thursdays." Ylrex looked between them. "I do not understand." Terran waved it off. "It's a joke. Humans cope with discomfort by making fun of it. And discomfort includes injuries, especially injuries." Calorin plucked a dark shard from one pouch and held it up. "This one's got trace vanadium. Might be worth testing under UV." Terran took it from her, angling it toward the filtered light. "Nice catch. You owe me a trade. I want the next sediment layer. Deal?" Ylrex watched them work in silence, his brow ridges knitting in quiet concentration. After a while, he took a few steps closer to the canyon wall and ran a delicate hand along the stone surface. "I have never witnessed such casualness in the face of bodily harm." "Get used to it," Calorin said. "We're very weird. You are statistically improbable." "That too." By the time they returned to the outpost, the sun had dropped behind the ridge. The sky turned the color of rusted copper, and the wind carried the dry whisper of incoming weather. Inside, the habitat lights flicked on automatically, casting a soft glow over the common room. Terran peeled off his brace and examined the healing cut. It scabbed cleanly, no sign of inflammation or seepage. The skin around it was still taut and sore, but not alarming. He rinsed away the grit, applied another antiseptic layer, and wrapped it loosely with fresh gauze. He didn't notice Cern watching from the doorway until he turned around. "Looking for something?" Terran asked. Cern stepped in, holding a small vial of clear gel. "Your dermal regeneration is proceeding at an accelerated rate. I synthesized a topical agent that might enhance it further." Terran eyed the vial. "What's in it?" "Polymers sourced from Thalkeen epidermal exudate. Non-toxic. Mildly photosensitive. So I'd glow under a blacklight, possibly." Terran took the vial and set it on the table. "I'll save it for party tricks." Cern hesitated, antennae curling slightly. "You do not trust our medical formulations?" "I trust them. I just also trust my own body to do what it's been doing for a few million years." Cern opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again. He gave a small bow and left. Later that evening, the outpost's atmosphere regulators kicked into high cycle to compensate for the pressure drop. Terran stood near one of the observation ports, watching the clouds roll in over the ridge, his legs still aching faintly. Ylrex joined him after a while, carrying a small data slate. "I compiled a report," he said, "on your injury response. Would you like to review it before I submit it to the Central Archive?" Terran shrugged. "Sure." The report was exhaustive: cellular timelines, behavioral notations, environmental factors, but there was one line he paused over. "Subject displayed no panic response despite the presence of visible tissue separation." He looked at Ylrex. "That's your takeaway?" "It is unusually consistent across all known human samples." Terran leaned back against the port frame. "You know, we don't heal because we're fearless. We heal because we expect to keep going." Ylrex tilted his head. "Even when odds are unfavorable, especially then." Ylrex stared at him for a long moment, then tapped something into his slate. "I believe your species may be more difficult to catalog than previously assumed. We get that a lot." 2 days after the canyon incident, the wound had finished sealing. The skin was still pink and tight, and the hairs around it hadn't grown back yet, but the cut itself was no longer a concern. Terran examined it in the mirror while brushing his teeth with one hand, the other casually tugging the bandage off. He spat into the sink and rolled his shoulder. "No pus, no weird smells, no alien fungus," he said aloud. "I'd call that a win." Behind him, the door creaked open. "I was told you would be dormant for another 30 minutes, said Ylrex, stepping inside with a datapad tucked under his arm. Yeah, well, humans get up early when they've got stuff to do. You previously categorized sleep as biologically crucial. It is, but so's coffee. And I'm out. Yilrex blinked once. I do not understand how the absence of a stimulant overrides the need for rest, because coffee is more emotionally persuasive than my pillow. Yilrex considered this, then entered a note into his datapad. I've been instructed to shadow your activities today. For educational purposes. You mean to see if I spontaneously combust? That was not the terminology used by Instructor Veal. Terran shrugged on a clean field shirt and stepped into his boots. Fine, but I'm doing a system check on the rover first. It's been rattling worse than usual. They walked out into the early morning haze. The outpost sat on a natural rock shelf overlooking the mineral basin, and the light from the twin suns filtered through the atmosphere in alternating bands of pale gold and green. Terran squinted against the glare as they crossed the short distance to the equipment bay. The rover in question, a squat, six-wheeled utility crawler affectionately dubbed Clunker, was parked beside a stack of sealed crates. Terran popped the hood and immediately frowned at the exposed wiring. Who jammed a coolant line into the power circuit, he muttered, reaching for a diagnostic wand. That was CERN, Yilrex said. He believed the fluid would assist with thermal regulation. Terran let out a low whistle. That's not coolant. That's bioengineered lubricant for the drone rotors. This thing's lucky it didn't catch fire. Yilrex peered in, eyes narrowing. I will log that mislabeling. You do that. Meanwhile, I'm replacing this entire junction. Terran pulled out a toolkit and crouched, his knees creaking slightly. Hand me the fusion clamp. Yilrex looked through the tools, held up a long rod with a glowing tip. That's the solder wand, other one. This? Yeah. Careful with the grip, it's temperature sensitive. Terran disconnected the damaged line, scraped off the residue, and attached a new interface plate. The fusion clamp hissed as he sealed the connections. I must ask, Yilrex said, watching intently, why you continue to use equipment so prone to malfunction. Because we're good at fixing things, Terran said, adjusting the alignment. We don't always get it perfect the first time, but we adapt. You accept operational imperfection, we improve through failure. That's how we learn. Yilrex was silent for a moment. Then your species is very inefficient. I'll take inefficient over fragile. The rover's engines hummed to life. Terran stepped back, brushing dust off his knees. Better. Might not sound like a freight train going through a blender anymore. Yilrex tilted his head. That is not a reassuring metaphor. Trust me, it's an upgrade. They returned to the outpost just as Caloran emerged from the comms station, her hair tied back and a grim expression on her face. Trouble? Terran asked, sort of. We've got a supply drop coming in 6 hours, but the beacon's misaligned. Veal wants someone to recalibrate the signal tower. Which one? The ridge, Terran sighed. That's a 3-kilometer hike. Unless you think Clunker's ready. Terran glanced back toward the rover, then to Yilrex. Guess we get to test it. The ride up was bumpy but survivable. The crawler's suspension still groaned on inclines, but at least it didn't shudder like it was possessed. Yilrex gripped the safety bar with both hands, knuckles pale against his green skin. This terrain is irregular, he said. That's geology for you, Terran replied, steering around a jagged outcrop. Your posture suggests enjoyment. It's a challenge, makes it interesting. They reached the ridge half an hour later. The signal tower stood about 10 meters tall, anchored to a reinforced base, its alignment dish skewed at a noticeable angle. A recent windstorm had likely done the damage. Terran climbed out and circled the base. Looks like the stabilizer bolts came loose. Yilrex remained seated. You intend to ascend that structure, unless you brought a grappling drone. I did not. Then up I go. Terran climbed the tower slowly, checking each handhold. The metal was sun-warmed but not hot, and the wind picked up slightly as he neared the top. Once there, he wedged himself between 2 crossbeams and inspected the dish housing. Yilrex, he called down, power off the rotator module. There was a pause. Then a clunk as the mechanism disengaged. Terran opened the access panel and adjusted the internal gyros. The realignment was delicate, requiring careful torque and a steady hand. He worked in silence for several minutes, then resecured the panel. "Okay, power it back on." The dish hummed, then slowly rotated into position. A green light blinked at the base. "Signal restored," Ylrex confirmed. Terran grinned and began the climb down. "See, nothing to it. You ascended a vertical structure without restraint gear." "I had gravity on my side. That is not how gravity works." Terran dropped the last meter and landed with a soft grunt. "It is when you know how to fall." Back at the outpost, the rest of the team was prepping for the delivery. Cargo zones were marked, shielding tarps anchored, and the airspace cleared of drone activity. The transporter arrived right on schedule, descending with a muted roar, its thrusters kicking up fine dust as it settled. Instructor Veal emerged from the crowd of Thalkeen students, his expression unreadable as always. "Signal was re-established," Terran said. "Tower's fine now." "I received confirmation," Veal replied. "Well done." Ylrex stepped forward. Terran also repaired the rover's core junction. Veal raised an eyebrow. "That system has failed diagnostics for 3 weeks. It was miswired," Ylrex said. He corrected it without reference materials. Veal studied Terran for a moment. "Your resilience continues to strain our models. Guess you'll have to update them." That evening, once the supplies were sorted and the sun dipped below the ridge, the outpost settled into a slow rhythm. The mess hall was quieter than usual. Most of the Thalkeen had retreated to their quarters, worn out from the logistics blitz. Terran sat at a corner table with a cup of rehydrated tea, his leg propped up on a crate. Calorin joined him, tossing a ration bar onto the table. "Still alive?" "Barely." She peeled the wrapper off the bar. "Ylrex asked me if all humans are this reckless." "What you say?" I said no. "Some are worse." Terran laughed, then winced as his leg twinged. "Okay, maybe I overdid it a bit. You didn't limp once today. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt." She nodded, chewing slowly. "They're learning, slowly, but they're learning." Terran glanced toward the observation window. The stars were just becoming visible, faint pinpricks against the darkening horizon. "I think they're starting to understand," he said. "It's not that we're fearless, it's that we don't stop." Calorin leaned back, her eyes following the curve of the night sky. "They thought you were decaying from the inside. Instead, you rewired a rover, climbed a tower, and realigned a satellite dish." Terran stretched his arms overhead. "Not bad for a guy with a leg cut." She raised her cup to him. "To not stopping." He clinked his mug against hers. "To fixing things." Across the outpost, the last of the supplies were secured, the lights dimmed, and the doors sealed for the night. No alarms sounded, no one panicked, and for once no one tried to swab Terran's leg while he slept. Everything worked, even him.